لا إله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله لا إله لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.
One of the greatest things that I've read, in fact, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, he was talking about the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was talking about the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us guidance and given us an immense source of insight in the Quran. And he was talking about the verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Nurun ala nur. And he mentioned that it means the light of the intelligence of the human being, the light of revelation. In other words, we're all given rational faculties through which to think. And also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed upon us a glorious book which gives us light in times of darkness. And it's important that this community, when it joins these two things together, it gives light not only to itself and its own community, but also gives light to other people. The proof of that is the glorious civilizations that we had in the past, in which communities and religions lived side by side, disagreeing about what is true and what is not, but nevertheless living side by side. And the moment that you break the link between revelation and intelligence and rationality, the moment that you break the link between what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed and what your mind tells you is allowed, at that point you have fallen into darkness. One of my close friends in Damascus, in fact, friend would be an understatement. He was a Shaykh, in fact. He was from Dagestan. Dagestan's a place in Russia. And he came to Damascus to study, and he stayed there for about 20 years. And he ended up getting a doctorate, a PhD in Islamic Usul al-Fiqh. In fact, if you looked at him, you would imagine that this person's a wrestler. You know, mashallah, the people of Dagestan have amazing physical prowess. And in fact, nobody here I can see would be able to take him on. But his power in his muscles was nothing compared to his intelligence, because his PhD was considered one of the best PhDs of the last 15 to 20 years in the city of Damascus. When they had the munaqasha, when he was in front of the professors discussing his PhD, they found no fault in his PhD. And his PhD was on one of the most difficult books on Usul al-Fiqh, Jam' al-Jawami', on the hashi of that, in fact, by Shaykh al-Islam, Zakaria al-Ansari, rahimahullah ta'ala. Now he left Damascus, and in fact this is about 5 years ago. He left Damascus after a long time there. He went with his wife and children back to his hometown. And in fact, when he arrived there, people were amazed by his knowledge. And he sat and he taught. And slowly but surely people started to see that he was given the light of guidance and the light of intelligence. And people started to learn from him. And when people start to learn from him, people got angry as well, because Dagestan, as you know, if you follow the news and see what's happening, is a place which is afflicted by trials and tribulations. And there was people there that claimed to know the Prophet ﷺ sunnah and the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they became jealous of him. And they started to spread rumours about him. And then they started to attack his family. And in the end they came, when he was teaching in the mihrab, they came and shot him dead. And this person, if he stayed alive, he was about 42, if he stayed alive, he would have been the mufti of that country. Because the teachers in Damascus, Mustafa Sa'id al-Khin, one of the great Usuli scholars of this age, he said he's never seen or heard of somebody in the last century who came to Damascus with so much knowledge. And when they killed him, they left a widow, they left children. And the people that killed him are now, every single day, being attacked in the unseen by the du'as of his widow. The poet says that person has digressed and committed something that's unspeakable. And for that person that does it, they have arrows every single day pointing towards them that will hit them. These are not just physical arrows, these are arrows that are dua from the widow at night before Fajr when she makes a dua. So we have to ask ourselves, we are a community, a very small community in Scotland, in fact in Britain, and we have the most amazing inheritance from the Prophet ﷺ, the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his sunnah, but which book and which sunnah? This is one of the poets in the past, he said, بِأَيِّ كِتَابٍ أَمْ بِأَيِّ سُنَّةٍ تَرَى حُبَّهُمْ عَارٌ عَلَيَّ وَتَحْسَبُ. He said, somebody was telling him, you shouldn't love the family of the Prophet ﷺ. And he said, which book? And they were quoting the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during the time of Bani Umayyah. He said, which book? And which sunnah do you use as a proof to say that it's not proper for me to love the family of the Prophet ﷺ? Every single person says that they have the book and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Every single individual you'll speak to will quote Surah At-Tawbah when they're running about chopping people's heads off in the streets. The issue is not about quoting the Quran and the Sunnah. The issue is about knowing the Quran and the Sunnah from the sources from which you know the Quran and Sunnah. Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala. And who was Imam Malik? Some people say to me, Hum rijal wa nahnu rijal. They're people and we're people. We can do our own freestyle DIY ijtihad. Imam Malik, who was he? The Prophet ﷺ said, لَيَأْتِيَنَّ عَلَى النَّاسِ زَمَانٌ لَيَضْرِبُونَ أَكْبَادَ الْإِبَلِ. There will come upon people a time when they will hit the livers of their camels. It's a metaphor for saying they will travel from here and from there and they will not find فَلَا يَجِدُونَ عَالِمٌ أَعْلَمُ مِنْ عَالِمِ الْمَدِينَةِ. They will not find a person more knowledgeable than the person of Madinah Munawwara. And Sufyan ibn Uyayna radiallahu anhu said, Wallahi Malik. He says, Wallahi, that's Malik. Why? Because Malik radiallahu anhu had an intelligence, not of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam just by itself, but he understood the maqasid, the reasons why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sets down laws. And part of his understanding was his understanding of hiraba, of treachery, of ifsad fil ard, of baghi, of insurrection. When he mentioned the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Ma'idah, إنما جزاء الذين يحاربون الله ورسوله ويسعون في الأرض فسادا. When it talks about people creating insecurity and insafety in the world by stealing and killing people, he said it's not just about stealing money. And in fact, he had a disagreement with all other scholars. He said it's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set this verse because it means that people are undermining the very basis of sane society. Which is what Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned, the 5 principles upon which not just our faith, but every single faith is based. Trying to protect wealth, intelligence, your ability to think about your religion and believe it, have lineage and have your honor. These things are not just protected by our faith. Izz ibn Abd Salam rahimahullah ta'ala says that our religion knows that these 5 are sacred, and every single religious tradition and every single sane individual knows that these things are sacred in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala said that this verse does not just apply upon a person. And the verse is very interesting. It says the punishment of people that fight Allah and His Messenger. وَيَسْعَوْنَ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَسَادًا, and spread mischief and discord in the earth. And this is speaking about who? It's speaking about Muslims. And how can a Muslim remain a Muslim when they fight Allah and the Messenger? That's not what the verse means. This is the whole problem we have nowadays. Quran and Sunnah. Who's Quran and who's Sunnah? How much have you studied to the point that you can understand what the Quran and Sunnah is? The scholars say that this is, the atf here is atf al-bayan. It means that people who deserve this punishment, which I'll mention, are people that spread mischief and discord in the earth. And through that they are enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. Through their actions. أَن يُقَتَّلُوا. Not just that they're executed, but they're executed to the most extreme degree. أَوْ يُصَلَّبُوا, or they're crucified. Have you heard any punishment in the Quran stronger than this? Do you find any punishment stronger than this? That if you spread mischief in the earth, undermining people's security, not just the Muslim community's security, which you'll see happen, but every single individual's security, regardless of their race or religion, this is what happens. And this, if you want Sharia, which Sharia do you want? This is the Quran and Sunnah if you want it. If you quote the Quran and Sunnah, you live by it and you die by it. أَن يُقَتَّلُوا أَوْ يُصَلَّبُوا أَوْ تُقَتَّ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَأَرْجُلُهُم مِّنْ خِلَافٍ. Or we'll chop your hands from one side and we'll cut your legs from the other. So is that the Quran and Sunnah that you're talking about? Is this the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you're talking about? Who said sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a hadith sahih released by Imam Bukhari, in which he said, "Man qatala nafsan mu'ahadan or mu'ahidan, lam yarah or yurih ra'ihat al-jannah." Whoever kills a person between whom that person and the other person there's a pact, he will never smell or be able to smell the scent of paradise. وَإِنَّ رِيحَهَا لَيُوجَدُ مِنْ مَسِيرَةِ 40 عَامًا وَفِي رِوَايَةٍ 70 وَفِي رِوَايَةٍ 60. That smell comes 40 years. It takes 40 years for that to come. And people 40 years traveling from that place in paradise can smell it. That person will not smell it. Ibn Qudama rahimahullah ta'ala, the great Hanbali scholar, he said any pact that you have with any individual cannot be broken regardless of the reasons. Do you not know that the Prophet ﷺ turned back people on the day of Badr because they had made a pact with the Quraysh that they would not fight with the Muslims? And how many people were in the Battle of Badr? How much need did the Prophet ﷺ have? And these people had come to him saying they will fight for you, Ya Rasulullah. And he said, you cannot because you've got a pact. With who? With the Quraysh. And who are these people? The enemies of Allah. And the Prophet ﷺ, we can't take you. What was the day of Hudaybiyah when a companion came after the Sulh of Hudaybiyah and he had to be returned back to the Quraysh to be tortured? Why? Because he had set up a pact. Pacts are there for reasons. Because if we don't keep our pacts, nobody keeps their pacts. This is why you don't kill people who you have pacts with. And this seems so obvious, and in fact, people will say, well, why are you talking about this? Why don't you talk about foreign policy? I'm a scholar, I'm not a political analyst. When I see people freestyling when they pray, freestyling when they buy and sell, freestyling when they talk about jihad, what comes to mind to me is a saying of a very important scholar of today. He said that terrorism for jihad is like adultery for marriage. You want to fight jihad? There's rules. And this is the reality of our situation. There's very few men in our community. There's many nutcases. There's very few people who will sit and study and take out the patients that they think they have on the floor with a Shaykh, and who will just go into Google and try and make up things as they go along. We've allowed this to go on far too long, a lack of education. Because we're talking about jihad, but every single avenue that you think about, every single individual you speak about, they will say we have their own fatwa, and they do their own things in talaq, they'll do their own things in marriage, they'll have scenarios in marriage which you've never heard of. And I'll leave it because I don't want to talk about that. But when it comes to a situation where you're affecting the security and safety of your fellow human beings, your community here, your Muslim community first of all, but also the wider community, at that point you really have to think about, as a community, how far do we allow these people or these thoughts to fester in our community? And that brings me to my last point, which is an issue of people constantly talking about the fact that Muslim organizations have failed. Since when has it been the responsibility of Muslim organizations to police people that are deranged? Where's the social services? Where's the police? We're a community that worships Allah and we obey the law. Every single statistical data that we have shows that the Muslim community is the most law-abiding in this country. This goes two ways. Our community establishes what the law is, what the Sharia is, what the book of the Prophet ﷺ means and the Sunnah means, and scholars teach this day in, day out. But it requires confidence from the other side as well. We require people of intelligence in the structures that be to meet us halfway in this. Because madness is in no one's interest. No one has any interest in creating war, civil strife, except extremists on both sides. And it's the people in the middle, elected officials and people in mosques and committees, and all the people I see in front of me, to lobby and to take an active part in society to make that happen. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.
I wonder if I've been good today. Didn't hurt nobody, so why am I afraid to pass away? Strange thought I have faith there is somewhere, and I love Allah. Someday I'll spark that fire. I'm a star